state of Guerrero, a state with a lot of issues and a lot of problems, and now we are in a point of history where a hurricane just hit it. It has been complete devastation. But the state itself has a lot of history, and a lot of things were happening there before this disaster. Can you talk a little bit about the issues in this state of Guerrero?
Sure. So before we go into the Hurricane OTIS, Guerrero has historically been quite one of the very highest rates of poverty. Criminal groups tend to have a presence there. All across Guerrero, there are estimated around like 16 big cartel groups, plus you have the collection of the smaller criminal bands, extortion bands, proliferating all across the state.
It's a valuable space because of its access to the ocean and the fact that it's a perfect landing spot for things coming from the south.
Exactly. So there's the Acapulco port. There's a lot of entrance of drugs coming from Central America, from South America. It's a big cocaine transport hub. So that also allows for criminal groups to take advantage of control in this area. Before OTIS, we saw major insecurity. One of the bigger events that happened was the murder of 13 police officers, two of which were the heads of Coyuca de Benitez.
This was a it's a massacre. It's 13 police officers, execution style, disarmed, roadside, and they took the directors of this institution with them. Mm-hmm. All of them executed.
Exactly.
Basically leaving a whole township without police.
And it was taken as basically a sign to other police officers to basically allow them to operate. You know, before this had happened, relatives of one of the police officers declared that they had received threats to allow, Chava Granados, head of the Granados, a smaller criminal band operating in Guerrero, was basically implicated in the murder. They're basically extorting cops, extorting everyone to either support them, collude with them, or this is the sign that they're trying to send. Yeah. So, we're experiencing Guerrero as high degrees of insecurity, high degrees of poverty, a lot of criminal organizations, and then a big hurricane happened. Category 5 hurricane happens that ends up devastating the coastal areas of Guerrero, Acapulco, Coyuca de Benitez, other municipalities around.
So I've heard conflicting information, but how much warning did we have about this ginormous hurricane basically hitting us?
Basically nothing.
It's said that there was a fluke, that it kind of it gathered strength as soon as it was going to hit.
Exactly. So the only basically warning that was given was the president released a tweet the day of when impact was expected to make a landfall, that they were expecting
a tweet.
Where most of the people also do not have access to internet.
Twitter isn't a big thing in Guerrero, probably.
It's not, exactly. So when we're talking about, communication means by the federal government, it was particularly ineffective. It also came very late. And it was one of the only directives to shelter in place, one of the only directives for citizens to actually seek any refuge. So for many people, by the time they received that information, it was far too late.
Yeah, they were sheltering in place in a high-rise facing the ocean made of glass.
Exactly.
Have we heard anything about a death toll?
So officially, the only death toll that we have is of 48 people. That is very conflicting with the reports that we're hearing from the ground. Exactly. Funeral homes are reporting around 350 bodies. Plus, you're not also including the people that are reported missing. Right now, we don't have a federal base of any missing persons or official death tolls, or at least names of the official death tolls. So, we're also operating in an area where we don't exactly know the severity of the situation. We know, what we can see, the devastation of the land. Over 200,000 homes were destroyed. We can see also the devastation around the tourist, the zona hotel, the hotel zone. And, we see from this, but officially the government hasn't really pronounced the severity of the area. 16 days after the disaster was declared, they declared an end of disaster. So, that also impedes a lot of the federal aid that they could receive.
So on social media, there's a lot of reports of private entities not being allowed to deliver aid to the area because the government doesn't want to look bad about it.
Exactly.
Is there any truth to that?
So what we have been hearing from local people is that they're not receiving enough aid. So we see lines and lines of people because, they'll make a point for a water distribution or some basic needs that basically people line up for hours and then they end up not receiving anything, or the goods are basically deplenished. Now, to counter that, we've also seen criminal groups delivering aid.
Reminiscent of the COVID epidemic, when the criminal groups were the ones handing out the despensas during COVID, and also enforcing the mask mandates in some of the towns.
Exactly.
So basically, we see another example of criminality taking the stage as a government agency.
Exactly.
Disaster relief.
And they're filling the void where government is not fulfilling. So it's back to the point that you mentioned, whether they're receiving enough. People on the ground say they're not. From the federal funds that need to be basically delivered to begin the reconstruction process, to the immediate aid and support, to foods and services, to the cleanup also. We're hearing a lot of trash piling up simply because there's not enough support. That is basically going to bring a rise of disease, of different.
There was also reports of mass looting happening, and it's still going on. Apparently, they're breaking into pharmacies, whatever is there, basically.
Exactly. Breaking into banks. Exactly.
So some of this seems, stereotypical of, but a lot of it seems organized. Mm-hmm. Like you say banks were broken into, and this sounds more like people taking criminal enterprises basically taking advantage of the situation.
Absolutely, and we're going to see a rise of that as well because of the problems that we're seeing with the government delivering the funds and the aid that we need, or that they need for the reconstruction process. This is also an area where we're going to see criminal organizations filling that void. Yeah. We're already seeing that they're providing loans for people to begin the reconstruction efforts to basically get what they need, medicine, food. We're going to start seeing also the proliferation of medicines and maybe illegal medicines. This is an area where criminal organizations are going to take a hold, from the real estate, also from laundering money. This is going to be a perfect area where criminal organizations are basically going to recycle their cash.
Yeah, and we get the response of the federal government in the form of el presidente, the president, in a Jeep, getting stuck in the mud. And the sad thing about this is, this is obviously a publicity stunt. Mm-hmm. But the sad thing about this is nobody's using that wench in the front of that Jeep to pull himself out. I think that's the saddest part of this picture. There's
definitely a lot of comedy about this, but yeah, the president basically was being criticized for not responding to the disaster fast enough. And then when he does respond, he responds in kind of the most ineffective way, which is...
In one of his press conferences, he basically said that he knew about the severity of the hurricane, but at that time he thought it was too late to do anything but panic people.
Exactly.
Which is a shelter-in-place order in a glass building facing the ocean is pretty bad.
Very ineffective. And it doesn't fulfill, the requirements that we have for the citizenry, for the people.
You mentioned that these types of situations usually create a perfect void for organized crime to basically go into legitimate situations. There's already talks about major contracts being placed to try and rebuild, recreate, and resettle the situation there. Mm-hmm. And that money is going to go to the companies that are, going to be involved in this.
Exactly. And there were huge rates of corruption already in Guerrero before this. So we could also anticipate that nothing has been done to recorrect that.
And Guerrero is a Morena
Yes.
state government.
Yes.
Morena is the current
President's political party.
president's political party.
Yes.
And as we are a year out from elections.
Yes. So that's also a very good point that you bring up, because a lot of the delivery of essential needs that we've been, seeing across Twitter, across Facebook, have been, described as popular as publicity stunts by up and coming new political campaignees, or by representatives of Morena party to try to get elected again. So we're also seeing that, in a lot of the disasters that happen in Mexico and a lot of the insecurity, we also see like that prominence of political candidates either campaigning for the upcoming election, trying to get revoted, trying to win hearts and minds. So unfortunately, that's also what we're seeing.
In a space where they just executed 13 police officers, including the director and the sub-director of the police agency that they were working for, these 13 police officers were probably their bodyguards. That's what they probably were. So 13 armed men isn't enough to keep you safe from the level of organized crime that is operating in that area. And after that happened, the bomb hit. And this is a Morena-controlled state, and it's also the same party that the president is currently a part of. So it's a blaring example of everything that is wrong, basically.
Absolutely. It highlights a lot of the basic ineffectual policies that we have in this country, down to the response, to also the miscommunication that the president has been running. There's been a lot of criticism about his response to the hurricane because he either criticizes the opposition group as, trying to
blame the other guys.
Yes, that they're basically making something bigger, that they're exaggerating the severity. When we saw the emergency response, the alert, it was quoted as severe rains and heavy winds or something of that nature. It wasn't categorized as a Category 5.
It's a Category 5 hurricane.
So we also see a lot of minimization from the president, from the government, as to, what the response should be and how the response will continue.
We're also seeing a lot of there was a lot of things in place in the past to alert people, to aid, emergency funds. A lot of this stuff has been gutted by this current president.
Exactly. We had a disaster fund built in the federal program, essentially. It was in 2020 that the president decided to null that program, to basically say that federal funding for disasters will now be implemented in the federal budget and, we can allocate. However, the reality has also been different, because now we're seeing a lot of the funds basically held up in court, or basically held up for approval of whether those areas needed. When we see this disaster zone, there were only 2 municipalities that were declared disasters, which is Acapulco and Coyuca de Benítez, which they were heavily hit. However, there's other areas around those municipalities that also suffered. So we saw a destruction of roads where, basically impeding mobility. People's homes were devastated. Large areas where corn plantations were, mango, bananas, corn were just devastated. And unfortunately, they're not going to receive sufficient federal support because they weren't declared disaster areas. So it's those funds like that now that they're nulled prove to have exacerbated kind of the response.
That 5-year amnesia that the government gets here every presidential cycle. Crisis in Chiapas. There's issues going on the border, but on the southern border, not on the northern border. I know the northern border with the United States gets a lot of attention, but violence is erupting right now in Chiapas. Chiapas, historically known as the cradle of one of the most known separatist groups in Mexico, the ELN, who basically tried to create an autonomous state of their own there. But the violence happening right now is very different than that of the early 90s. This is cartel related. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on?
Sure. So we have seen violence in Chiapas from years ago. From 2015, because it is a very strategic area for any criminal organization. It borders the southern, it's basically on the southernmost part of Mexico, borders Guatemala. There's typically a lot of crossing and smuggling of illegal substances. So it's become historically quite prominent. Now, within the last 2 years, we have seen an escalation of those conflicts because we've seen the Jalisco cartel join the fight. So before, there was a huge prominence of the Sinaloa cartel, basically gaining that territory, gaining that control. In 2021, we saw basically a hit. One of the sons of the leader of the Sinaloa cartel was murdered. One journalist, Anabel Hernandez, who is quite prominent among the kind of the narco literature, wrote proclaiming that she had evidence that the hit was actually ordered by Mayo Zambada within their own organization, to basically take out. This is evidence of that hit. This is Ramon Gilberto Rivera Beltran, the son of Theo Gil. After this hit happened, we saw a splinter between the Sinaloa cartel, probably factions that felt that, killing one of your own or, having allegiance to this person, they broke up and created El Maíz, who now has relationship with the Jalisco cartel.
So basically they create their own independent criminal organization now, and are siding with the main rivals at a national scale of the Sinaloa cartel, which is the New Generation cartel.
Exactly. And this is the kind of thing that we see when, higher escalations or higher levels of insecurity are reported. This is kind of what we saw in Michoacán, in Zacatecas, in Guanajuato. So this is also being replicated now in Chiapas, where we're seeing a destabilization of the previous kind of majority-controlled criminal group with now the emergence of a new criminal group. So unfortunately, Chiapas is finding itself in quite a very insecure situation right now. 3,000 people have been displaced out of their homes because of the violence between these two groups. We've just seen continuous escalation. Activists are being targeted as well.
In some of the videos that we were seeing, specifically that video I mentioned of the Sinaloa cartel coming into town, the townspeople are cheering them on.
Exactly.
Now, is it because they see them as the winning side or the good side? Can you talk about some of the sentiment, local sentiment?
Sure. So to lead up to that, this is a video of the Jalisco cartel, and this is kind of what we're seeing, them displaying on social media. They're reporting that they're doing patrolling around certain areas, displaying heavy weaponry, and this is what we're seeing with people essentially protesting that.
And mind you, they had to move a lot of vehicles and equipment through the country to get there.
Yes.
So it means that there's an open highway and nobody's minding the roads in a lot of ways.
Yes, we constantly see a lot of movement or, heavy weaponry basically ending.
This is an armed vehicle convoy that moved from one part of the country to another. And
exactly.
Yeah, I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah. So this is, what we're seeing with the Jalisco cartel basically causing, both groups clashing, and then basically we're seeing bodies ending up around the central areas of Chiapas. So in response to that, there was a video of a Sinaloa convoy basically entering, and this is basically what we've seen with blockades and the level of violence and insecurity.
So it's this Mayo Zambada sponsored convoy entering Chiapas in response to the violence being received with accolades.
With cheers.
Yes.
And also, again, this is far from El Mayo Zambada's historical strongholds of power and control.
Yes.
And somehow he's made it all the way to Chiapas with this convoy of openly armed personnel.
Exactly. All SUVs, all pickup trucks. Yes. And, it's very difficult to actually say what these people are feeling. There's a very mixed emotions, very mixed bag of people saying that, they're probably paid to cheer they might have, some of them may feel genuine appreciation that they're coming here to liberate them from the Jalisco cartel. It's very difficult to say what is actually happening, but the reality is that people are essentially amassing to receive members who are very clearly, they represented themselves as a Sinaloa.
Not even the Mexican military gets a welcoming like this. So it's another telling aspect of we're in failed state territory where there's clandestine armed governance basically sending supplies and now reinforcements to secure whole states.
Exactly. And leading up to this, we had been seeing a rise of narco blockades that were basically instigated or alleged to be instigated by the Jalisco cartel. So we saw, a really big spike of violence before this happened. And, if people hear the audio of it, there's a lot of support for the Sinaloa cartel. There's several videos relating to this. It's over 14 vehicle convoy. And unfortunately, this is the reality that we're also finding ourselves, where there is also an absence of a sound security strategy or federal security strategy to prevent either clashes, people being displaced by criminal organizations, people being extorted by criminal organizations, and then we have situations where another criminal organization will basically take that command.
For me, the interesting thing is, I was active almost a decade ago. Free movement like that across states was unheard of back then because there was actually military presence on the roads. It seems like the total withdrawal of that federal presence.
Yes, and it's not only in Chiapas as well. A lot of the federal highways across Mexico are very, very insecure. We constantly see videos of people being basically carjacked or pulled over in a fake checkpoint or just being extorted or harassed.
So we're in the historical center of the ZLN, and a lot of people talk about them. There are many organizations in Europe, in the United States. I've been to a few colleges in the United States universities where people are wearing ZLN t-shirts, and everybody sends money down to these groups. Where are they? Where are they in this whole scenario? Where is this revolutionary armed group? Where are they in this fight?
Yeah, so the ECLN, the Zapatistas, as they're locally known, they're basically operating around autonomous areas that they've kind of declared as their own. The latest report that we've seen from the Zapatistas is basically they've disbanded MARES, which is the Municipales or Municipios Autónomas Rebeldes, basically like one of their autonomous enclaves as well. Sorry to cut off, but just so that we're also seeing, because of the rise of cartels, we're also seeing local additional criminal organizations come up in fight of those cartels. So
to these local armed defense groups and stuff like that. So, but again, the ZLN isn't in any of these groups.
Exactly. So these we'll typically see these guys kind of declaring themselves as also like the resistance force or combatants of cartels. Historically as well, a lot of these organizations that started as resistance groups have also transgressed or kind of become cartel organizations themselves. But yes, back to the EZLN, the latest communication is that they've disbanded one of their autonomous municipalities. One of the beliefs or one of the reasons why is because the cartels basically started recruiting their people. We've seen a presence of these criminal organizations within those autonomous areas. And I think it's a way for them to basically disassociate themselves.
I mean, this is not like the 90s where the federal government was going to go after the ZLN and they were going to do it with gloves. These are criminal organizations that are already there, abducting some of their people, probably murdering some of them also. This is not a theater for a political theater for the world stage. This is a real threat.
The EZLN has kind of taken a step back and become more of a civil organization, civil society organization. Recently, we saw a video of members claiming to be Zapatistas, basically declaring that they're going to go against the cartels, that they're kicking the cartels out. There's actually a video that came out, and the Zapatistas said,
Yeah, it's not us.
it's not us.
That didn't come from us.
Exactly. So, we're seeing a lot of confusion, a lot of different organizations kind of coming up for the fight, but no one's really sure who is who.
Yeah. And on the other side of the border, with Chiapas, we have a federal government in Guatemala who's very nervous about what's happening and basically deployed the military on that side. Historically, their military, I mean, what I've heard is that they have a special forces unit and they call the Caibiles, which, funny enough, a lot of its members come to Mexico and join some of the criminal organizations up here. But I've heard through my channels that there's been reports of shootings and skirmishes along the border. So it's even become international in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
So it's spilling over.
Exactly.
And we've heard this also with, we had a big migrant crisis in the southern border. This is where we received also Mexican federal forces basically moved to the southern border to try to contain that. So Guatemalan also federal forces have also moved to the border to support in that. But we are hearing that there's a lot of
movement between.
Yeah, but the main reason why the federal government of Mexico is on that border is immigration, not the fact that there's an ongoing, basically civil conflict going on there.
And this is what we also hear from residents in Chiapas that, when asked what the federal forces are doing, they're basically saying they're doing nothing, that they're only here to observe the migrant caravan and the migrant crisis. But when it comes to providing them support, they feel very left alone. And they feel that the government is not supporting them as they have to be displaced from their villages and displaced from their areas.
So federal forces in this case is the Mexican Army and Guardia Nacional, the National Guard unit that was basically a federal police organization that was pulled from the military. And at the start, it was sold as a national police force, but it's very much become a border protection force. Like, we see them here in Tijuana, we see them in places like this. And one of the main complaints I hear from everybody is that they don't do anything. Their sole function is to presence, is to just show up and intimidate, I guess.
Exactly.
And it's, as we can see here, it's not their presence isn't really doing anything to move things along safety-wise. Do we know of anybody winning this fight, or if anybody's basically taking over?
Right now, we're almost at the height of the conflict. Every week I receive reports about new blockades being erected by either criminal group, clashes. These clashes have also happened in San Cristobal de las Casas, which is, one of the most popular tourist destinations down in Chiapas. So, we're only seeing an incremental rise, unfortunately, and, it's the people that are in the middle.
Yeah. One thing I would like people to start doing when they see all these conflicts and some of these flare-ups, to see how much proximity they have to the ocean, ports of entry, and borders. Basically, this looks like a giant strategy by at least one of these cartels to take control of entry ports.
Absolutely. And this is synonymous with what we see across other, points of conflict, or the bigger points of conflict across Mexico, is that there tends to be a port, there tends to be a border where there's a lot of smuggling movement, because it's on the border of Guatemala. A couple of years ago, there were only, I feel like, one handful of narco laboratories on the border. Now that number has exponentially risen because Guatemala has also access to a point of entry, a port, where they're receiving Chinese precursors for the making of fentanyl. So we're seeing cocaine, fentanyl, other drugs basically moving across from border to border. So freely. Absolutely. They're also working with the Guatemalan criminal organization, Los Vistas. So we're seeing, this problem doesn't just contain itself in Mexico. We're seeing it exponentially rise
and spill out south.
Exactly. Where, historically there's a lot of corruption as well. There's a lot of poverty. So unfortunately, it's a recipe for disaster.
As a what's next or commentary, do we know of any border section that is controlled on the northern side of the border, on the U.S. side of the border, basically this U.S. border? Do we know of any segment of that border that's controlled by the New Generation Cartel?
I'm not sure.
I question that. I asked that question because I think the answer is there's none yet. But when there is, this is what we're going to expect, I think. Some sort of spilling over of violence to the other side. So if people want to see a forecast of what's in store if this keeps going, this is a pretty good example of what that might look like in a major, next to a major American city, right next to the border.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we've seen, Chiapas is a forecast for different states, just as Zacatecas, Guanajuato have been a forecast for what's going on in Chiapas.